I want to start this deep dive with a moment of silence for the captain.
The captain.
Yeah. You know exactly who I'm talking about. The little guy in your head, the one who's supposedly steering the ship.
That guy.
The one who looks out of your eyes, weighs the options, grips the wheel, and says, okay, I choose to go left.
Right. The author, the CEO.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because after spending the last, 48 hours with this massive stack of research you sent over, we're talking neuroscience, systems theory, these essays on the collapse of blame, I'm pretty sure the captain has been dead for a very long time.
Or maybe, and this is the really unsettling part,
He was never there at all.
he was never there at all. That's the vertigo you're feeling, isn't it?
Vertigo is putting it mildly. It's more like the floor just fell out of my entire universe. It changes everything.
It does, and that is a completely natural reaction. We're looking at the architecture of agency today, and the core premise, it's going to sound radical, it might even sound terrifying to some people listening.
Oh, for sure.
But it is the consensus of a very specific, very rigorous scientific lineage. The autonomous self, the author of your life, is an illusion.
And we need to be so precise about what we mean by illusion right out of the gate here.
Yes.
Because we aren't going into mysticism. We aren't doing the we are all one consciousness in a, woo-woo spiritual sense. We are talking about mechanics.
Structural mechanics. That's the perfect term for it.
We have papers here from the Haynes Lab on brain timing. We've got split brain research from Michael Gazzaniga, and we have complex systems theory from Norbert Wiener. This is hard science.
Exactly. This is a structural analysis.
Yeah.
And, usually we have these two separate worlds. We have the scientific world where, okay, we know humans are biological machines. We're driven by neurons and hormones and physics.
The world of cause and effect.
Right. And then we have the human world where we wake up, we drink our coffee, and we feel like we are making free choices all day long.
Totally. It feels real.
It feels absolutely real. The mission of this deep dive is to crash those two worlds together. We want to see what happens when you stop viewing yourself as the author and you start seeing yourself as a participant.
Participant. Okay, that word is the key shift, isn't it? Because if I'm not the author, the immediate panic is, then who is driving the bus?
Right. Who's in control?
But the sources argue that's the wrong question entirely. The bus drives itself based on the road conditions, the weather, the engine's mechanics.
And that shift from author to participant, it isn't just a philosophical parlor trick. It's not just a neat idea. As we get into the distortions of identity and later the collapse of blame, we're going to see that this view is actually a massive relief.
A relief? How so? It feels like a loss of control.
Because it takes the crushing weight of control off your shoulders and it replaces it with something much more practical.
Alignment.
Alignment. Okay, I'm intrigued. So, lay it out for us. What is the source stack we're working with today, just to give everyone a map? Okay, so we have a collection of core essays that are all centered on this concept of the architecture of agency. Then we have the rigorous breakdowns of the neuroscience, particularly looking at things like the ego tunnel and the interpreter module in the brain.
Okay.
And finally, we have a parable, a really beautiful story about a weaver that kind of illustrates the difference between what we'll call performance and what we'll call contact.
Fantastic. So let's get into the clean scientific lineage first, because I really don't want anyone thinking this is just, our opinion. This starts with the brain itself. And the heavy hitter here, the one that really sets the stage, is Thomas Metzinger and this concept of the ego tunnel.
Metzinger is absolutely essential. He's a German philosopher, a cognitive scientist, and his work attacks the most basic feeling you have. The feeling that there is a subject inside the experience, a little you that's having the experience.
The captain.
The captain. He argues that the brain is, for all intents and purposes, a biological system that's locked in a dark, silent vault.
The skull.
The skull. It has no direct contact with the outside world, none at all.
Right, it just gets these electrical impulses, spikes and waves of data. It doesn't see light, it receives raw data about photons hitting the retina. It doesn't hear sound, it gets data about vibrations in the ear.
Correct. So to make any sense of that chaotic, impoverished data, the brain has to construct a model. It runs a simulation of the world. But here's the trick, the part that's so brilliant. A simulation is useless unless you have a center of gravity.
The point of view.
You need a you are here red dot on the map. So the brain creates what he calls a phenomenal self-model. It creates an avatar, a little character that stands in for the whole organism.
And this is the ego tunnel, the idea that we are living inside the model and we're completely identifying with the avatar. We think we are the avatar.
Precisely. But the evolution of the brain made this model what he calls transparent. You don't see the model, you just look through it. It's like a perfectly clean window. You don't feel like you are a simulation running on a network of neurons.
No, you feel like you are the person looking out the window.
An agency, that feeling of, I did this, is just a tag. It's a piece of metadata the brain attaches to certain actions so the organism can distinguish between I moved my arm and something or someone moved my arm.
So the I is not the thing doing the moving. The I is the report that the moving happened and that it originated internally. It's like a notification on your phone.
Yes, that's a perfect analogy. The self is not the pilot. The self is the flight recorder. It's just logging the data so the system can learn and adapt, but it isn't pulling the levers. It's not in the cockpit.
That distinction becomes, almost undeniable when we look at the split brain research. This is Michael Gazzaniga's work. This part of the reading actually made me laugh out loud because it's so absurd, and yet it explains so much about human behavior.
It is deeply absurd. Gazzaniga worked with patients whose corpus callosum had been severed, usually to treat severe epilepsy.
And that's the bundle of nerves connecting the left and right hemispheres of the brain.
Exactly. So he cut the communication between the two halves. And what he found was that you could show a command to just the right brain, like a word flashed on a screen that says stand up.
And the right brain controls the left side of the body, and it's more nonverbal spatial.
Right. So the person would stand up, their body would obey the command. But the left brain, which is the seat of language and logic, didn't see the command at all.
So the person stands up. Gazzaniga asks them, why did you just stand up? Now, the logical answer, the truthful answer, is I have no idea.
But they never ever say, I don't know. That's the horror and the beauty of it. The left brain, without missing a beat, immediately fabricates a reason.
Like what?
Oh, I wanted to get a soda, or my leg fell asleep and I needed to stretch. It invents a plausible narrative after the action has already occurred in order to explain it. Gazzaniga called this specific module the interpreter.
The interpreter. That is just...
Yeah.
It's devastating because it implies that what we call reasoning is often just post-hoc rationalization. It's storytelling.
That's what it is.
We act on impulse, on conditioning, on these deep biological triggers, and then this little press secretary in our left hemisphere steps up to the podium and spins a story about why it was a rational choice all along.
And we believe the press secretary. We think the press secretary is the president. We think that story is the reason for the action. But the troops had already moved hours ago. This is crucial for understanding why we do what we do. We aren't rational agents, we are rationalizing agents.
Speaking of timing, that brings us directly to the work of the Haynes Lab and Benjamin Lieben before them. Because if Gazzaniga shows us we lie about why we act, Libet and his successors show us we are fundamentally wrong about when we act.
Yes. The Libet experiments are basically the nail in the coffin for temporal free will. In the modern versions of this experiment, you have researchers using fMRI to monitor brain activity. They give a subject a simple choice, like press the button on your left or the button on your right whenever you feel the urge.
Okay, a simple, seemingly free choice.
A simple choice. And they can watch the brain activity and predict which button you are going to press up to 7 to 10 seconds before you are consciously aware of having made the decision.
10 seconds.
Oh,
I can't get over that number. In neural time, that's an eternity. That's the difference between a knee-jerk reflex and writing a novel.
it's a vast amount of time. And what it implies is that the conscious choice, the feeling of, okay, now I'll press left, isn't the start of the process. It's the memo you get at the very end of the process.
Right.
The brain has already weighed the variables. It's checked the dopamine history. It's assessed the risk. It's initiated the motor command in the premotor cortex. Then, 10 seconds later, you think, I have decided to press left.
So conscious will is a report. It's a notification on your phone saying message sent. It is not the finger hitting the send button.
Exactly. There is no initiating will in that moment. There's only a delayed awareness of a calculation that has already occurred deep in the system.
Okay. So if we accept this, and the data from multiple labs over decades is really hard to argue with, it leads to the next big question. If I am not controlling the system, what is? And that seems to move us out of pure neuroscience and into systems theory. You mentioned Norbert Wiener in cybernetics.
Wiener completely changes the unit of analysis. He says, stop looking for a controller inside the box. That's a logical fallacy. No system controls itself from a single point. Systems regulate. They regulate via feedback loops.
And we are an open system.
The most open system there is. You are a permeable node in a massive interconnected network.
This is that network dynamics part of our source stack. It argues that we aren't, these self-contained fortresses. We're more like windsocks.
That's a fantastic image. Everything acts via mutual influence. Think about it. You walk into a room, the temperature of the room impacts your cortisol levels. Someone gives you a dirty look or serotonin drops. You feel that, so you snap at your partner.
Your partner yells back.
Which changes your input again. It is a continuous, unbroken, recursive flow of causality. There's no point where you can stop the tape and say, here's where I made a free choice, independent of all that. You can't find it.
And this connects directly to the idea of predictive processing from people like Emil Seff and Antonio Damasio. They argue that the self is basically a stability construct. It's a controlled hallucination.
Right, and this is so key. The brain's #1 job isn't truth. It's not free will. It is homeostasis.
Survival. Keeping you alive.
Just keeping the organism alive and stable. The self, this feeling of I, is the prediction that keeps the organism coherent. It bundles all these chaotic inputs, social contagion, biological drives, temperature, hunger, memory, and it creates a unified feeling of me so that you don't just dissolve into a puddle of sensory chaos. It's a regulatory fiction.
So to summarize this entire scientific verdict section, human behavior is an emergent property of a fantastically complex system. What feels like my personal will is just a coherence signal generated by all these distributed processes. We are distinct shapes, yes, but we're all part of a single, massive, moving fabric.
That is the structural reality according to this lineage of science, and here's the friction. The reason we're even having this conversation, it doesn't feel like that, does it?
Not at all. No, it feels like I'm struggling. It feels like I'm winning or losing. It feels intensely personal.
And that persistence of the illusion, the absolute visceral realness of it, is what leads us to the next part of our deep dive, the 5 distortions of identity. Because if the science says the self is a fiction, we have to ask, why do we work so hard to maintain it? Why are we so obsessed with managing a self that doesn't actually exist?
The sources lay this out as the core problem. It says we mistake managing the shape of influence for managing a self. I love that phrasing. We confuse the structure, the biology, the environment, the network with a soul, with an autonomous agent.
And the sources identify 5 specific distortions that arise from that confusion. These are like the lies we tell ourselves to keep the captain alive, even though he's not on the bridge. The first one is containment, the idea that I am what is inside me.
This is the belief that my traits are like possessions. Like I have anger, or I have anxiety, or I have intelligence.
Right. It assumes you are a bucket, and the contents of that bucket are generated by you and belong to you. But structurally, that's not what's happening. Selfhood is boundary work. You are defined by where you end and the world begins. If you feel angry, it's not because you have anger deep inside you like a kidney stone.
What is it then?
It's because the organism is vibrating in response to a field condition. There's friction in the environment.
So instead of saying, I am an angry person, which is an identity statement.
A containment statement.
Right. The more accurate statement is something like, this organism is currently regulating a high-friction environment.
Exactly. It's a process, not an identity. But containment makes us defend our contents. It makes us incredibly defensive. If I think the anger is mine, I have to justify it. I have to protect it. If I see it as just weather passing through the system, I can just observe it and let it go.
Which leads right into distortion number 2. Authorship. The belief that I am the origin.
This is the big one. This is the foundation of our entire moral and legal system. We invent choice to explain emergent behavior.
Okay, give me an example. Something happens, let's say you cheat on your diet. You eat a whole pint of ice cream.
Okay.
Structurally, that happened because of a cascade of factors.
Yeah.
Your glucose levels were low, you had a stressful day, so your cortisol was high, you have decades of habit loops around comfort food, you saw an advertisement on TV, it was an emergent outcome.
A perfect storm of conditions.
But authorship says, no, I chose to be weak. Or, conversely, if you resist the ice cream, I chose to be good.
It moralizes mechanics. It turns a system error into a sin, or a system success into a virtue. And that single move creates the entire cycle of pride and shame and guilt. If you are the author, you are to blame for the weather. It's a totally insane proposition, but we do it all day long. We take credit for our genetic luck, and we take blame for our trauma responses.
And when we start believing we're the author, we have to put on a show for other people, which is distortion number 3. Performance. I am what others see. This feels like it's describing the entire internet.
It is the looking glass self, a concept from sociology. We realize on some deep primal level that we are permeable, that we need the tribe to survive. So we try to control that permeability by performing. We stop participating in the reality of the moment and start performing for the audience.
The source had that amazing line. We stop weaving our own thread and start trying to look like a weaver.
That's it right there. It creates a gap between what is actually happening internally and what is being shown externally. That gap is a source of profound exhaustion. When you are performing identity, you are constantly regulating. Did I smile enough? Did that sound smart? Do they think I'm a good person?
You're running a second track in your head the
Right,
whole time.
constant management layer. And it burns an incredible amount of energy that could be used for just living, for actually being in contact with the world.
Okay, so distortion number 4, for me, this one hit me the hardest. Correction. The idea that I can fix myself.
The entire basis of the multi-billion-dollar self-help industry.
Right. But why is it a distortion? Shouldn't we try to improve? Isn't that a good thing?
The attempt to improve isn't the problem. The distortion is in the architecture of the attempt. The idea of correction assumes there is a me that is broken and a separate, wiser, better me that is going to swoop in and fix it.
Right. The I who read the book is going to fix the I who eats the donuts.
Oh, but the one doing the fixing is just another product of the same broken system. It's been shaped by the exact same history, the same biology, the same pressures.
It's an echo trying to fix the voice.
It is. You read a book on discipline, which is a new input into the system. So now the system has a new discipline subroutine running. But you call that, I am taking control. No, the system just updated its software. When we think we are doing the fixing, we get stuck in these horrible loops of trying harder, failing, and then hating ourselves for failing.
Why can't I fix this? I'm so broken.
Because the I that is trying to fix it is the brokenness. It's part of the same structure. You can't lift yourself up by your own bootstraps if you're the bootstrap.
Which brings us to the final wall in this prison. Distortion number 5. Coherence. The belief that I must be consistent.
We are terrified of contradictions, absolutely terrified. If I build an identity as a kind person and then one day I feel a surge of cruelty or rage, I have a problem. I have to suppress it. I have to hide it from myself and others to maintain the kind person shape.
But the system is contradictory. We are, as Whitman said, we are large, we contain multitudes.
Exactly. We have competing drives. We want safety and adventure. We want connection and solitude. The system is inherently messy. The demand for coherence is a cage. It creates rigidity. We freeze ourselves in a pose rather than moving dynamically with the flow of influence. We become brittle.
And brittle things break.
Brittle things break under pressure.
So, okay, we have these 5 walls. Containment, authorship, performance, correction, coherence, all built to protect a captain who isn't even there. If we tear these walls down, if we really truly accept there is no choice in the traditional sense, do we just become zombies? This is the fatalism trap I keep falling into.
Yeah.
Well, if there's no free will, why bother with anything?
That is the most common and most important objection. And the sources pivot here to something really fascinating and practical. They draw a sharp distinction between the myth of choice and the reality of discipline.
This completely redefined discipline for me. Because usually we think of discipline as a battle. It's willpower versus desire. I want the donut, but I will use my mighty will to force myself to eat the kale instead. It's a fight.
And that's the internalized control model. And the sources argue that if you are fighting yourself, you are already incoherent. The battle itself is a symptom of distortion. It means the system is divided. You have one powerful drive saying sugar, energy now, and another drive saying health, long-term survival. And they are at war.
Which is exhausting.
It's the most exhausting state to be in. So what the sources propose is that real discipline isn't about winning that fight. Real discipline is coherence. It's what happens when the interference ends. The source has this incredible line, you don't practice discipline, you remove distortion.
Can you give me a concrete example of that? How does that work in practice?
Okay, think about touching a hot stove. Do you need willpower to not touch a hot stove?
Of course not. They just know it burns. The outcome is certain.
Exactly. The perception of the danger is completely clear. There is no internal debate. The clarity of the perception dictates the action. You don't choose to pull your hand away. The knowledge, the clarity, moves the hand. There's no conflict.
I love that line from the text. Control requires management. Clarity requires nothing.
That's the whole thing. When you really viscerally understand, not just intellectually, but in your body, that the donut makes you feel sluggish and foggy and the kale makes you feel alive and clear. When that isn't just an idea, but a felt reality, you just eat the kale. the choice disappears. The behavior simply emerges from the clarity of the view.
So the work isn't to choose better in the moment of temptation. The work is to see clearer all the time.
You deconstruct the choice. The source argues that what we call decision-making is just the time delay where the brain computes all the relevant data. If you improve the quality of the inputs, if you see the causal links between action and consequence with perfect clarity, the output improves automatically. You don't have to try. The system just produces a better result.
This is a huge shift. It moves the point of action from the moment of decision to the process of cultivation.
Precisely. You're not fighting the river, you're changing the shape of the riverbed.
Okay, This leads us into the deepest water of this entire deep dive. Because if we drop authorship, if we drop the idea that I am the unmoved mover, what happens to blame? What happens to morality, justice?
This is the collapse of blame and moral authorship. This is where the rubber meets the road for how we treat ourselves and, more importantly, how we treat other people.
And the sources are, they are brutal here. They just systematically dismantle the entire structure of blame.
To blame someone, to truly hold them morally culpable in the deep traditional sense, you have to assume 3 things are true about them in the moment they acted. 1, they had access to your current perspective, your current knowledge, at the time of their act.
Which is impossible. If they knew then what you know now, they would have acted differently by definition.
2, you have to assume they were free from the conditioning of their own history, their trauma, their biology, and the immediate environmental pressures they were under.
Which is physically impossible. You can't be free from your own brain. You are your brain.
And 3, you have to assume they had the authorship to rewrite their own neural structure in real time to prevent the impulse from firing.
And since the Libet experiments show us the impulse fires up to 10 seconds before the conscious mind even gets the memo.
Blame collapses. The entire architecture for it is structurally unsound. Now, this doesn't mean we don't stop harm. If a tiger is mauling you, you shoot the tiger. But you don't blame the tiger. You don't ascribe evil to it. You don't think it made a bad moral choice.
You just recognize it as a dangerous system acting according to its nature, its programming.
Right, and you respond to the danger. The source says, you don't control your behavior. That doesn't make you passive. It makes you embedded.
Embedded, that's the word again. So when someone hurts you, the old model is to ask, why did they do this to me? Which centers your own ego and assumes their total freedom to have done otherwise.
Yes.
The new model is to ask, what shaped them? What conditions and pressures produced this behavior through this person?
A completely different question. It shifts from personalization to analysis.
That sounds like forgiveness, but the sources make a point of saying it's not.
It's actually the end of forgiveness. Forgiveness is a hierarchy. It operates from a position of moral superiority. I, the righteous victim, will now release you, the sinner, from your debt.
So it keeps the score. It assumes a debt exists in the first place.
It absolutely does. But if there is no autonomous controller who freely chose to incur a debt, then there is no debt to forgive.
So what is there instead?
There is only exposure and adjustment. You were exposed to a harmful system. You now adjust your position relative to that system. The source calls this compassion without sentiment.
I love that phrase. Compassion usually feels so soft, so emotional. This feels technical.
It is technical. It's like a mechanic looking at a car that won't start. You don't hate the car. You don't get angry and scream at the alternator. You understand the spark plugs are wet. You understand the structure of the problem. You can look at a person screaming in a traffic jam, and you don't see a villain. You see the stress, the cortisol, the poor sleep, the financial pressure, the history of trauma. You understand the mechanism.
And this allows for what the text calls boundary without punishment.
Yes. You can and should still set boundaries. You can leave the relationship. You can fire the employee. You can exit the system. But you don't do it to teach them a lesson or to inflict punitive pain. You do it because the system is incompatible with your system's well-being. It removes the venom. It removes the desire for revenge, which is just a desire to rebalance a moral score that never existed.
And for ourselves, when we're the ones who mess up, the source says responsibility without shame.
This is the real healing part. You look at your own mistakes, the times you yelled at your kids, the times you failed at a project, the times you hurt someone, and you stop identifying as a bad person. You simply acknowledge the output. Okay, that harmful output came from this system under these conditions.
And then you take responsibility for adjusting the system.
You take responsibility for adjusting the inputs. You ask, what was I carrying? What pressures was I under? How can I change the environment, my health, my inputs, so that output is less likely to happen again?
I am the result of shaping, not a failed project.
Oh.
I swear, that one sentence could save a lot of people a lot of therapy bills. It shifts the entire question from what is wrong with me to what is happening through me.
And how do I change the inputs? That is the only place agency actually lives. Not in the magical moment of choice, but in the intelligent and compassionate design of the environment.
But, and there's always a but, as soon as we start to get this right, as soon as we start feeling this egoless clarity, this compassion, the captain tries to sneak back on board wearing a fake mustache and a trench coat.
Yes, he does. Section 5, the trap of spiritual performance. This is so critical because the ego is a master appropriator. It is the best at co-opting any insight and turning it back into a tool for self-aggrandizement.
The classic is, look how humble I am, or in this case, look how enlightened I am. I am so aware of my lack of free will.
Exactly. The source calls this identity management hijacking insight. The truth isn't used for liberation anymore, it becomes decoration. It's a new, shinier costume for the same old ego. We see this all the time in so-called spiritual circles. The guru voice.
Oh, the voice. Soft, slow, really, really meaningful pauses.
It's a performance, it's a costume, it's what the sources call impression management. You are consciously or unconsciously choosing words that sound wise rather than words that are simply honest. You are editing the stream before it even leaves your mouth to make sure it fits the brand of wise person.
And tidying grief, that concept really stuck out to me. Can you explain that?
Tidying grief is when we refuse to be messy. So when a raw emotion like grief or anger comes up, the spiritual ego immediately says, no, 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 I am an aware person. I must process this immediately into a lesson or a teaching. We curate the emotion before we even let ourselves feel it.
We want to skip the wound and just have the wisdom. We want to be the after picture in the self-help ad.
Precisely. We treat our own vulnerability as a product, a story to be packaged and consumed by others to prove how much we've grown.
And the most subtle sign of this performance, according to the text, is something called predictive posture. What is that?
Predictive posture is incredibly sneaky. It's when you are in a conversation listening to someone, but you aren't actually receiving what they're saying. You are simulating the next 3 moves of the conversation in your head to make sure you maintain your wise or helpful persona.
So you're not present.
You are not present at all. You are preparing your exit from silence. You're planning your response while they're still talking. You aren't in the moment. You are directing the scene. You're treating the present as a rehearsal for a future moment that hasn't even happened yet.
Okay, so if that is the trap, turning this profound insight of no self into a new and improved super self, what is the way out? How do we actually live as a participant without just performing participation?
The sources end with a return to innocence, and they use this beautiful parable of the weaver to illustrate it.
This story really feels like the anchor of the whole argument. Could you walk us through it?
Of course. So there is a weaver, and she creates these incredible, complex tapestries. But she works by rhythm and contact. She doesn't have a pattern memorized in her head. She feels the tension in the thread. She responds to the texture of the wool. She is in a pure flow state. The weaving happens through her.
She is a clear channel. There's no interference, no second guessing.
Exactly. No interpreter is narrating the process. But then, one day, a stranger passes by, and the stranger can be a person or just a thought. And the stranger says, that is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. You are a special weaver, a gifted artist.
And the captain wakes up.
Yeah.
The ego is born.
The trap snaps shut. Instantly, she begins to protect her gift. She looks at the thread and she doesn't see material anymore. She sees my reputation. She sees my worth as a weaver. She stops weaving from contact and starts weaving to be seen.
And the thread gets heavy.
The thread gets heavy. The pattern becomes rigid and forced. She starts correcting every little perceived flaw. She starts managing and controlling. And the joy is completely gone because the contact is gone. It has become a performance. She is weaving for the stranger even when he's long gone.
Until the loom jams.
Until the loom jams. Burnout, a crisis. The system fails. It can't sustain the performance anymore. And in that moment of failure, she has a realization. She can't fix it. The harder she tries to force it, the worse it gets. So she stops. She stops trying to prove she is a great weaver. She just loosens her grip.
She stops resisting the jam. She accepts the failure.
She accepts it. And in that surrender, the pattern returns. Not because she tried harder, but because she finally stopped interfering. She returned to innocence.
But this isn't the innocence of a child, right? A child is innocent because they don't know any better. This is different.
It's completely different. It's the innocence on the other side of experience. It's what the sources call unarmored awareness. It's knowing all the science, knowing the complexity of the system, and yet still showing up with absolute simplicity. And the sources give us 4 clear signs of this realignment so we can know when we are back at the loom properly, not just performing.
Okay, what's sign number 1?
Simplicity. Things no longer require a complicated story. A cup of coffee is just a cup of coffee. It's not a metaphor for your spiritual journey. It's not a reward for being good. It's just warm liquid in a cup. You stop overinterpreting the data.
Sign 2. Action without hesitation.
Movement emerges directly from contact with the situation. You see someone drop their groceries. You don't stand there asking, what is the compassionate thing to do? How will this be seen? You just help them pick up the groceries. The lag time between perception and action disappears because the interpreter has finally been fired.
Sign 3. Humility without collapse.
This one is so important. Usually when we feel humble, we feel small. I suck. I'm worthless. But this kind of humility is just the simple, non-judgmental admission of confusion. It's the ability to say, I don't know, without any shame attached.
It's not a statement of value, it's a statement of fact.
Exactly. It's just an honest acknowledgement of the limits of your particular simulation.
And the final one, sign 4. Intimacy without performance.
This is about being with other people without the mask. You feel safe, not impressive. You aren't trying to be the smart friend or the wise guru or the funny guy. You are just present. You are a node in the network, vibrating with the other nodes without constantly trying to dominate or manage the frequency.
The source has this one line that defines innocence as speaking before words are perfected. That is a terrifying thought to me.
It's terrifying to the ego. The ego is the editor-in-chief. It wants to polish and perfect every single press release. Innocence goes live. It broadcasts the raw feed. It shifts the entire goal of your life away from freedom of choice and towards freedom from distortion.
Freedom from distortion. That really is the summary of this entire deep dive, isn't it?
It is. We started with this terrifying idea that we have no free will, that we're just biochemical puppets, but we've traveled through the science and the philosophy and arrived at a place where that puppet status is actually the ultimate liberation.
Because if you aren't the puppeteer, you don't have to carry the crushing weight of the whole show.
Precisely. It's the end of the war with yourself. It's replacing the constant grinding exhaustion of managing a self with the ease of simply being a shape within a structure.
A shape within a structure. I like that.
And it all comes down to one final concept I want to leave people with. The idea of the mirror versus the mask.
Okay, go on.
If your self-improvement practice or your spiritual path or your therapy is reinforcing who you think you are, if it's polishing your image, making you a better captain, a more coherent and consistent self-stuff, it is a mask. It's just a more elaborate performance.
On the mirror.
If it dissolves you,
Yeah.
if it shows you again and again that there is no fixed you to polish in the first place, if it breaks the image apart and reveals the underlying mechanics, then it is a mirror.
So the final question isn't, how do I make better choices?
No.
The question is, what would happen if I stopped trying to be the author of my life and just let the thread move through me?
The pattern would finally be clear.
So the advice isn't to try to figure it out, it's just to watch the thread.
Observe where you are performing. That's it. That's enough. The observation itself changes the system.
This has been incredibly heavy, but also strangely light.
That's how you know it's true, when it holds both at once.
Thank you for unpacking this whole illusion with us.
It's always a pleasure to see the wires behind the screen.
We'll see you in the next deep dive. Or I guess the deep dive will happen and we'll both be there as it unfolds.
Something like that.
Take care, everyone.